My name is Sierra Lee. I'm a junior in Professor Royce Davies' Black Women in Political Leadership class. It's an honor to be here with you all today. Thank you, Professor Richardson, Associate Professor of African American Literature in the Africana Studies and Research Center. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, the English Department, the Society for Humanities, and Helena Vera Montes. In addition to the College of Arts and Sciences, the Africana Studies Center, and the Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies. It is a pleasure to introduce my colleagues Bryson and Jasmine, who will be introducing our speakers to the event. And throughout the event, I would encourage you to live tweet Black Women's 2020 and Black Women Lead. And also, Professor Richardson will be welcoming people to Africana.
Hello.
Oh, you doing it? Go. You're on.
Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone who has come out this evening. It is a great honor for Africana in the year of the 50th anniversary celebration to welcome the distinguished scholar and Black feminist critic, Barbara Smith, to campus. As the chair of programming, I bring you greetings on behalf of this department's programming committee, which also includes Indri Afia Lamamba, Noliwe Brooks, Gerard Achi, and Siba Rabotu, along with Professor Carol Boyce Davies. I also greet you on behalf of Africana's faculty more generally. At this time, as we reflect on our past, we are also looking and thinking toward new futures, which is our theme for the year. We are so thankful to be co-sponsoring this important dialogue at such a crucial juncture in Africana's history, a field that was founded right here at Cornell, and that, in spite of its visionary history, has had lingering blind spots when it comes to gender. It has been challenged to reflect on the impact of gender and sexuality in shaping identity and to embrace and recognize the intellectual contributions and histories of women scholars more fully. It is crucial, too, for us to have dialogues about what Africana womanism means for us, Africana feminism, and to make linkages between our intellectual investments in such scholarship, where so many of us have homes in Black feminism and gender studies, and to consider how best we can engender climates of safety, well-being, inclusion, and support for women, as well as spaces for thinking about and coming to voice on issues of gender and sexuality. And we are working toward a future where our voices are fully heard and valued, and where our texts and our bodies, to invoke Barbara Christian, feel welcome and visible in the best ways. Some phenomenal and distinguished Black women intellectuals and citizens have been considered as friends of Africana, including Toni Morrison, Dorothy Cotton, Jackie Moulton Scott, and Gloria Joseph. It is events like this that sustain this beautiful legacy and continue to carry it forward, charting the course to get new futures. This event draws on and builds upon the pedagogical ingenuity and dynamism of Professor Carol Boyce Davies to set forth a conversation to which we are all invited and from which we will be able to learn from the genius of two legendary scholars in Black feminism. So it is quite a privilege, and thanks so much to her for spearheading and coordinating this monumental event. which I first encountered as a student in reading your now classic essay toward a black feminist criticism, which I draw on in my teaching of the course Toni Morrison's novels. But some of us are brave, and Homegirls are works that I also studied, coming of age as a scholar, and they are works that lit the way for so many great hopes and possibilities for so many people everywhere, and underscored the value in the voices of black women and other women of color. It is so wonderful that we have this opportunity for dialogue, and especially at such an exciting time in Africana's history. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Bryson. I'm also a student in Professor Royce Davies' Black Women in Political Leadership class. So it's an honor to introduce her today. Dr. Kara Royce Davies is a Caribbean-American professor, author, and scholar who is currently a professor of Africana Studies and English at Cornell University. She's the recipient of 2 major awards, 2007, the Friends Famine Lifetime Achievement Award from the Caribbean Philosophical Association, and a Distinguished Africanist Award from the New York State African Studies Association as well. She's held distinguished professorships at a number of universities and is the author or editor of a number of books, including the 3-volume Encyclopedia of the African Diaspora, and my personal favorite, Left of Karl Marx. She's lectured on Black women's writings and experience, Black-led feminism, Black women in political leadership, and African diaspora issues at major universities in Brazil, Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, Australia, India, and China. As an educator, she is outspoken on relevant issues of her people and continues to advocate for our progression. Without a doubt, it is my honor to introduce the venerable Dr. Carol.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Scott. Welcome to this really beautiful, gorgeous space. A black, queer feminist, a socialist, Barbara Smith has spent her entire life fighting for liberation. After settling in Boston, she worked to begin a Boston chapter of the National Black Feminist Organization. Yet, through a charge for the inclusion of black lesbianism and what our guests might assert was destiny, the Combahee River Collective was born, co-founded by Smith in 1974. Woo! Yep. The collective's manifesto, the Combahee River Collective Statement, was published 3 years later. I could go on and on about what this word did for black feminism, but some of the elements that really resonated with me were that she put into words the sheer amount of labor that was expected of black women in movements that did not represent their interests, the centering of class oppression in black feminist discourse in a time where middle-class black politics prevailed, and finally, a much-needed reminder, I think, even so now, to center coalition building internationally and solidarity as we continue to work in silos. Luckily, for black feminism, for us, and for our academic black girl hearts in the room, Smith really worked to carve out a space for black feminism in the publishing industry. With Audre Lorde, she established the Kitchen Table Press in 1980 and published many pieces, including her ever-resident Homegirls, a black feminist anthology. In 2014, she published Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, 40 years of movement building with Barbara Smith, to give us even more context into intersectionality and identity politics. It can't get more personal, really, than our personhood, but I do want to establish the bond between our speaker today and the Cornell community. Today's speaker and her collaboratives were, for so many black queer women like myself, and for those who fill this space at the moment, a huge breath of life into our conceptualization of black feminist organizing, of ourselves, and of liberation. Particularly as we're gathered on a college campus that owes just about everything that it is to student activism, one that sits on top of Cayuga land, might I add. I want to emphasize that she helped build the student activist foundation that we are standing on. As a college student at both Mount Holyoke and New School in New York City, our guests participated in a huge amount of Black student organizing, organized against the Vietnam War, and also traveled to protest the Democratic National Convention. I very much believe that her cutting anti-capitalist touch also resonates so much with university students today, as the price of their knowledge has skyrocketed. Just a few hours away in Albany, she was elected into office of the Common Council from 2005 to 2009. There, she worked avidly on violence prevention, youth development, and poverty, and developed a community policing model. Today, she continues to work in community discussions, conferences, workshops nationally and internationally, bringing Islamophobia and trans rights into the conversation. Thank you so much for being here today. Please graciously welcome Professor Barbara Smith.
Thank you all for being here. Two people I have to thank. Donna, my goodness. Give Donna a round of applause. And Aidan Kelly from GSL. Thank you so much. Okay, so it's a conversation, but actually Barbara is probably going to do most of the talking. And I want to thank her. She was with my class, so we had an amazing, I'm so proud of you all for the way you conducted yourself in class. So they were brilliant. They had wonderful presentation and great questions. And, these are the kinds of memorable things that we need to be able to do, for sure. I mean, we all know those. So what I'm going to do is just raise a number of questions which I actually shared with Barbara Smith before. She came to campus, so that she would be already thinking about them, and then we will let her go with them. So basically, first of all, so we have an audience made up of a new generation of young people, some of course older in the audience as well. And I was so many of our students, many of them were not even born at September 11th. Some were, but some were like 1 or 2 years old. So basically it would be, I think, useful for them to hear a little bit about your own personal political journey to becoming an active Black woman activist. I know you have done this before, but I think we all learn a little bit more each time once we hear your version of the historical events that make you be who you are.
Thank you so much, Professor Royce Davies. It's such a pleasure to be back at Cornell, and I've been here on a number of occasions. I can't tell you how many. Memory fades, but it's really nice to be here. This is incredibly special. I just want to say about that history of Africana Studies at Cornell. I went to Mount Holyoke. I graduated in 1969. There were very few Black students on my campus at that time. And we started what was at that time called the Afro-American Society. And we fought for that. But I had a dear friend who was also in my class, and she was dating, and then by senior year she was engaged to a Black student here at Cornell, Walter Esdale. And when students did more than demonstrate here at Cornell to get this program, not this building, because we weren't even thinking, I'm sure people were not thinking about this physical space. But when they demonstrated in a very militant way, we were sitting over in Massachusetts wondering, because there was the only way you could communicate was by the phone in the hallway. You know, you didn't have a phone in your room, you didn't have a cell phone, had no email, none of the stuff that makes for instant communication. So I remember being with her, worrying, about what was happening over here, but knowing that, of course, people were doing what needed to be done. done. We were fighting for Black studies at Mount Holyoke as well as were people fighting all over this nation. And just so you know, I said this in the class this afternoon, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I did not know if it was a graduate class or an undergraduate class. I found out it was undergraduate, which is even more impressive to me. But for people in our generation, that word venerable was used. But the thing is, for people in our generation, we could not study Black studies. We're the people who said, we can't study it, you don't have it, we're going to make it.
Right.
And that's what we did. And you definitely couldn't study Black women's studies. So the fact that we have people getting doctorates now in fields, you know, I was in contact with a graduate student just a couple of weeks ago, and he is, you know, working on his degree, probably at the dissertation stage. I said, what are you working on? He said, 18th century Black women. I said, wow, you know, 18th century Black women. That just was not even possible. So that student activism, just as you said, that student activism is what makes possible what we are engaged in this afternoon. And I think that we should be both humble and proud of that legacy, because that's the shoulders that we stand on. So, how did I get involved in Black women's movement organizing? I was involved in the civil rights movement as a teenager in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was active in CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. Like many northern cities, Cleveland's civil rights struggle focused a lot on school desegregation. There's a wonderful book that I read last year that came out last year, Jean Theo Harris's A More Beautiful and Terrible History. The myths, I'm not going to say the subtitle probably completely accurately, but myths and misuses of civil rights history. And there's a chapter about that struggle in the North, and she uses New York City and Boston as her two examples. And until I read that book, I knew that I'd been involved in that struggle in Cleveland, but I did not know how typical it was of northern cities to have people organizing around the issue of school desegregation. So that was my entree into politics and into grassroots political organizing. I volunteered for CORE after I'm a twin, and my sister and I volunteered at CORE, the CORE office, after we graduated from high school. We graduated in January. We had mid-year graduation, so we had like that up until September of that year before we went to college. And because we had a wonderful woman who was the head of CORE, I think that's how she let us get our foot in the door of being able to work with an activist organization. So that was really very special. So I went to college, and the civil rights movement was really transforming into Black liberation, Black power, and Black nationalism. And in some ways that was manifested in our Black student organizing on campus, but also the war in Vietnam. I entered in '65. The war in Vietnam was becoming more and more intense and more volatile. And small groups of people were beginning to understand that this was not right. There's some people who understood it wasn't right because it was a war. But as I said, there was an anti-Vietnam War movement building, and we indeed did do actions on our campus to bring that to other people's attention. And I was actively involved, as I said, in the movement to end the war in Vietnam. And then I went to graduate school and was really kind of discouraged about how, if I could be politically active because of the Black nationalism and walking however many paces behind those roles that were assigned to Black women during those days. And I was just not about that. You know, I just couldn't imagine, you know, after all, all the experience, now I'm just going to be like a handmaid? Oh dear, oh dear. Okay, so anyway, but being alert, you know, as generally, you know, I've tried to do throughout my life, I was aware, of course, that there was a women's liberation movement growing. I did not really see a place for Black women in that movement, because the way it was framed, the fact that Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, when it came out, I think it was 1964, it focused on middle-class white women. Middle-class white heterosexual women, to be quite specific. And it just wasn't, it didn't align with the experiences that I had had, nor the experiences of the Black women in my family. But a few years later, the National Black Feminist Organization began, and fortunately I was able to go to the founding conference of the National Black Feminist Organization. That was in late 1973, and we started organizing a chapter of NBFO, as was already mentioned, and then we became independent, and we named ourselves the Combahee River Collective because of the raid that Harriet Tubman planned and led on the Combahee River in South Carolina. Now, a major moment. Oh my goodness. But anyway, we became independent because we were not satisfied with the way that NBFO was able to interact with its chapters. It was an underfunded organization. We also were very much to the left and had several people, I'd say almost all of us in the early days of Combahee had been a part of the left in different formations of the left, including the Black Panthers. And also, as I said, working to end the war, organizing to end the war in Vietnam, etc. So we became independent, we declared ourselves socialists. But there's a person here, right here in this audience, who is a catalyst, and who was a catalyst for why most people know about the Combahee River Collective. And that's Professor Emeritus from Ithaca College, Zila Eisenstein, who she edited a book titled Capitalist Patriarchy and the Case for Socialist Feminism. And she asked if we met through a mutual friend, and she asked if the collective would write something for the book. And what we wrote was the Combahee River Collective Statement. So that's that. It's very complicated being a woman of color, a feminist of color, to be a queer or trans woman of color. It's complicated to be working class, to be an immigrant, to be a refugee, to be Muslim, to be temporarily able or living with disability. All of these things are very complicated, and that's the movement that we wanted to build. Wow.
So basically you're in the presence of a Black feminist icon.
That's an exaggeration.
No, exaggeration. Since you were part of the group that actually defined a field called Black Women Studies, and recognizing that there are gaps into which we fall in at times, often misrecognition of who we are, sometimes straight up avoidance of engaging with our presences. How do you assess what has happened since in terms of Black studies on the one hand and women's studies on the other? For example, in your essay Establishing Black Feminism, you make a fine distinction between Black women's studies, which you say continues to be challenged by racism, misogyny, and general disrespect, and Black feminism, which has ushered in hundreds of professional organizations, meetings, books, so on, in the academy, which were often invisible before. You said, therefore, that Homegirls, when it first appeared, was asking for some of these things to happen, and they have. But you make a distinction between Black women's studies and Black feminism. Would you speak a little bit about that?
I don't know if I make quite as clear a distinction or quite as definitive of a distinction as I was then. I was trying to make a point about the movement from which Black women's studies came. In my life, of course, they were absolutely simultaneous, and I was involved in both. So at the very same time that we were building the Combahee River Collective and building a Black feminist movement, I was also involved in teaching Black women rights, so one of the first or earliest courses in the nation. on that, looking at that subject matter, and as I said, then building Black women's studies. So, as I said, in real time, chronologically, all of it was happening for me simultaneously. I believe that all the great things that happened to liberate people, and probably the planet too, the planet as well. I feel like all the great things and all this strides forward that we make, it's because of movements, it's because of organizing, it's because of from the ground up. People now talk about policy, people love to talk about policies and how important policies are. But where do you get the ideas that the policies need to even be transformed or changed? It's because people are knocking on your door or sitting in your office or marching in the streets saying, this can't stand, this can't stand. I think about ACTA and how people now have, in some context, what we could consider to be rational policy around HIV and AIDS. Where did that come from? They didn't think of that themselves. They began to think about it because people were making life ungovernable. You know, they were making the situation ungovernable so that they would have to look at it at a time that the words were not even being spoken by the administration at that time. I'm talking about you, Ronald Reagan. But in any event, as I said, I think that I would not necessarily make such a distinction these days. Also, quite frankly, because I'm not academically connected or employed, I don't know everything that's going on. Or I don't even have a good sense of things that are going on in the fields that I have been involved with. I get news from colleagues and from sort of other kinds of experiences, but I would not be the best person to ask what's the status in the profession, what's the status, even in Black feminist organizing, although I probably know a little bit more about that than I do about what's happening in Black women's studies.
Okay, cool. So to intersectionality, of course. There's so much buzz. There's so much buzz now about that term, which has attained a certain currency in the academy and even in media circles. People say intersectionality, all sorts of things now. But Kamba here talked about simultaneous oppressions, interlocking oppressions, for example. There's a new book by Patricia Collins titled Intersectionality as Critical Social Theory. And there's another book, Black Feminists Reimagined, Actual Intersectionality by Jennifer Nash. Kimberly Crenshaw, of course, has defined it for legal studies and gets, I guess, identified as the inventor of the concept. And I know that there have been discussions about ownership of the term. How do you read all of these framings and how does the work you did before intersect with that?
I don't think that we have to be turf-driven in an actual feminist movement or in other movements that are about liberation. You don't have to be turf-driven. If people want to know about when was such and such first said, that's easy to trace. I think that talking about the simultaneity of oppressions and interlocking oppressions definitely was a precursor to the concept of intersectionality. As far as the term itself, the concept itself, I think it is kind of a buzzword because people use it without even having the smallest idea of what actually implementing it requires. Because what is required to function with an intersectional perspective is a huge amount of political courage and political integrity. It's not just something cute to say. And you will hear people in kind of unexpected context say, well, you know, that's a very intersectional way. But this is intersectional, that's intersectional. It's just like it is like a buzzword. It's kind of like multiculturalism and diversity, the way that those were buzzwords some years ago, not that long ago. So I think I would much rather focus on the importance of the terms as opposed to what people think about the terms. I think that looking at all the vectors and all the ways that people from different standpoints, that standpoint theory, which I think is really a great way to also understand. That's another way of talking about intersectionality. Depending on who you are, where you are, what your economic status is, all those factors of identity, you will experience things differently than people who are not indeed oppressed as a result of those systems, if you see what I'm saying. So there are people who swear that racism is over. And why do they say racism is over? It's because, what did Mitch McConnell say this past summer? He said that we passed, I guess, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and we gave them, something like we gave them a black president. They had a black president. It was just like, really, and even John Roberts, with that Supreme Court decision where they nullified the Voting Rights Act, he said that you can't really successfully prove or analyze that racial discrimination is happening in the context of voting anymore. Really? It's such nonsense. But as I said, I think that it's much more important to look at the meaning of how do we function on a day-to-day basis with an intersectional perspective than it is to talk about what other people think it means. It's much better to self-interrogate around the reality of various relationships, varying relationships to systemic inequality than it is to talk about what's cute.
Okay, so we're going to have a question from one of the students in the class, so I wanted to get ready. She knows who she is. But yeah, there you could you come up. But essentially, what I wanted to ask you for this class, what it is about men and women's leadership in terms of the use of political power. How come masculinity keeps cornering leadership still, even in the space that we're in, and so deliberately? And I wanted you to add your question to it or join.
Hi, I'm Amina. I'm a junior at Cornell. I'm also in Professor Turbo's Black Women Political Leadership class. But my question to you would be, why is it often that there's like a large Black power movement, but women are so often largely excluded from that, and then there has to be a separate movement to advocate for the rights of Black women?
Yes, Amina.
Well, there's a reality of sexism and misogyny because of patriarchy across all identity groups. So patriarchy is systemic. It predates capitalism, right? And it complements and helps to shore up capitalism, certainly. And it does indeed manifest itself in various cultures and various geographic locations. And even though race is not scientific, within various races and groups, ethnic, etc. So the fact that that's the case means that when we get to political movements, we're going to see the replication of some of the bad practices that you see in dominant political formations, which is men on top and women, that word that I used earlier this afternoon, handmaidens. And I think the reason that we built Black feminism is because we thought we needed to have a voice. And we knew we were not necessarily going to have it in the context of what was going on at that time, because that was really the heyday of Black nationalism and Black power politics. And so we just said we got to do it. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's like you don't make political progress if you just accept things as they are and don't move to another place. At the very same time, we believed in coalition work, and we definitely believed in toppling white supremacy. Very few people, I should say very few, maybe nowadays everybody's, well, who knows, But the thing is that when you think about the Combahee River Collective, and just a little footnote, I've discovered that we've been pronouncing it incorrectly all these years. It is not Combahee, it's as in Combahee. And the way I found it out is I was listening to this podcast about the raid on the Combahee River in South Carolina, and a lot of people from South Carolina, and these are contemporary people in South Carolina, were being interviewed, and they always referred to it as Combahee. And so I've been telling people that. I said, well, we pronounce it the way that black women in the Northeast, we saw 3 syllables, so we pronounce all 3. But in any event, whichever way you pronounce it, most people would not think of the Combahee or Combahee River Collective as a black liberation organization, but we were. We were part of the black liberation movement. But because of factors, namely sexism and homophobia, we were outsiders. It was only, I have on my favorite button, which is the Black Radical Congress button from 1998. Huge gathering, like over 2,000 people in Chicago, met at the founding conference of the Black Radical Congress. I was actually someone to help to plan and organize that conference, thanks to Barbara Ransby, but also Manny Merrill.
Yes, ma'am.
And Lee Mullins. We were all involved. And that was the first time, and I said it when we had an intergenerational dialogue. I said that this was the first time that I had ever been included with my generation, people in my generation, as a member of the Black liberation struggle. And Kathleen Cleaver was there, and Angela Davis was there, and everybody was there. But I had never been included. And others like me had not been included because of those factors that I mentioned. So finally in '98, which is more than 20 years ago, people began to see, oh yeah, they really were about, black liberation and struggle, etc. But anyway, I even forgot what the first question was. I know I have a point. Oh yeah. That I think what I've said probably, well, certainly the earlier things that I said speak to that. It's important for us to organize and define our politics at the very same time that we figure out who we can work with politically. We were not separatists, and we believed in coalition work. And I think that attitude is not very prevalent these days, from what I see on social media. I think that our willingness to accept and work with people who were not our mirror images, that takes a lot of strength, takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of optimism and vision. So we actually, it was like a case-by-case basis. Is this organization, are these people, are they fighting and want to fight around the same issues that we do? Okay, so we can do that. They're not members of the collective, but the thing is, that doesn't mean that we can't work on something and on struggles together. That's how we win. You can't win in small groups. You have small groups, and you build and build and build. We hope one day we'll be a mass movement for balance.
Okay. So much has changed since Combahee, which deliberately named itself after Harriet's military action, but also claimed the space for black lesbians who also include women. And on that point I want to stress, because people forget that that was one of the first, you were one of the first groups to actually make that space open. So it was not just U.S. African American issues, but including women and issues. So it's, I think as a black feminist and black lesbian, you indicated that in many cases, it was a lifetime of work that you would have to be engaged in, and clearly this is true. But how do you assess what has happened since then in these movements? And I'd love for you to also talk about how you saw the film Harriet. If you could combine those two.
I'm not sure. There are many more manifestations of women of color organizing than when we started, and there's certainly many more manifestations of people who are part of our LGBTQ community and movement, there are many more manifestations that we are getting the work done than back in the 1970s, the dawns, the mist of time, or whatever. We still have a lot of work in front of us. One of the things that I find fascinating is how acceptable it is now to even be a black lesbian. Like as I said, like you can be black lesbian movie stars now. And being couples, and everybody thinks it's just wonderful. Really? How did that happen? How did that happen? And of course, nobody knows how it happens because they haven't read, this stuff. And they just think it's because they're great and people are accepting it. How do people get to be accepting? I'm not sure. Could it be something, called movements? Yeah, a movement. Hard fought, hard won to get people to understand that sexual orientation, sexuality, gender presentation, gender identity, all of that is complex, and whatever it is you feel inside, because you know what you feel inside, each of us does in a way that no one else will, that we have a right to how we feel and how we define ourselves. I've grown around these understandings because when I first came out, and I was not out in college or during the civil rights movement per se, I came out in the mid-1970s, and when we first, we were doing our organizing, etc., and we were going to early gay prides, I remember feeling uncomfortable with people who were, what was in those days called cross-dressing. And they may not have been trans. They probably weren't, But you see what I'm saying? That it was just like this, no, you're not supposed to do that. We were sensitive. We felt like, are they making fun of us? Are they making fun of women? Are they going to stereotypes? And then, years go by and consciousness expands, and then you begin to understand better. We were never hateful, never. And by we, I'm talking about women in comedy and feminist color. I've known some of the best people of my generation, and as I was saying to Professor Boyce Davies, we were raised. So the thing is that you just didn't, act out. You didn't act out, and be really. We were not cruel. We did not trade with cruelty. So even if we were wondering about things, we weren't necessarily snapping at people and saying horrible things and casting people out or whatever. And as I said, as time has gone by, I now have better understandings of how important it is to admit what you don't know and not to presume that you do. And I consider to be trans women my sisters. I absolutely do. And one of the things that I've observed, that I consider trans men to be also part of my family as well. And one of the things that I've noticed is that my venerable, I'm going to use that word over and over now, that my venerable lesbian feminist friends, we're not always in touch with each other on a constant basis, but when we check in with each other and we talk about trans political issues, etc., we're almost always on the same page, which I love. And see, that shows the kind of politics that we had. We don't have to be talking to each other. We're in different places all around the nation, and it's like, what's the big deal? We know it's a big deal because of the level of oppression, and that's what we also stand for too. We fight oppression. We fight against dehumanization. We fight against violence. So anyway, it's all, as I said, it's all on a continuum. Harriet, you want to talk about Harriet? I saw Harriet on Sunday. How many people have seen it? I am fascinated by, I don't read reviews until after I see a movie, and I'm a huge movie fan. I don't know if I'm a movie buff, but I've seen quite a few movies since how old was I? I was 4 years old in 1950, I guess. So, I've seen quite a few movies since 1950, and I love movies. But I was surprised after seeing the movie. It's starting to look online and see what people were saying, how much negativity there was about the movie. I was really interested in that, and I thought that the basis of some of the negativity didn't really have to do with the content of the film. And also, it reminded me, and Professor Royce Davies just said the same thing, that the controversy around the black male slave catchers, those characters, it's similar in some ways to the furor around the color purple.
Yep.
And I like the movie. There were certain things I didn't know. I never had thought that there was such a category of people during the pre-Civil War period. I never thought that there were black people who would be helping white slave owners to capture other black people. I never knew about that. I did know that there were some few black people who owned other black people. I didn't know that, you know. Yeah, oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I knew bad things, negative things had been done, but I never thought of a particular situation of like someone actively trying to help recapture people who had escaped to freedom from enslavement. But I haven't found, a huge amount about it, but my understanding is that there is a historical basis for that. And there are other things that have been said about the film that I don't necessarily agree with, but I haven't done enough reading to know. I haven't said anything on Twitter about having seen the film.
But you had a nice statement about the ending that you said.
Oh yes,
Nice reading of it.
yes. Well, I love the fact that I didn't think I'd ever be in a movie theater and see the words Combahee River at the bottom in big letter. I never thought that would happen. I never thought that would happen. It gave me such a feeling. It gave me such a feeling because we picked that name because we saw ourselves as being in a continuum from her to where we were. One of the reasons we picked it, as we say in the statement, is that we didn't want to name ourselves after a person. We wanted to name ourselves after an action. And that was quite an action. I had read a short biography about Harriet Tubman during that period, published by Radical Press. I think it was International Publishers. And that's where I found out about the rape one. I said, wow, So I told people about it in our group, and that's the name that we ended up using. But as I said, that was just quite amazing. And I don't want to do spoilers, but there's a scene. You're talking about my interpretation of that scene?
It's a good.
Okay, well, there's a scene in the movie where the person who had enslaved, a vicious person, who was a composite, not a real person, I guess, or not a historical figure. The person who was portrayed as a person who had enslaved Harriet Tubman shoots one of the slave catchers. One of the slave catchers joins Harriet. So one of them goes over to the correct side, and then the white slave owner told the slave catcher, excuse me, I want her taken alive. Now the reason he wanted her taken alive is because he wanted to take her back to enslavement and torture her. That's what he wanted to do. He didn't want her taken alive because he cared about her life. He wanted to take her alive so he could put her back in bondage and make her life hell on earth for all the rest of her days. That was his goal. So the fact that he shot the enslaver, he wasn't protecting her. But of course, if all you do is look at a trailer and then start tweeting, that's what you get. That's what you get. And that's exactly what we got. So there are a lot of people who think that it's trash. The movie is complete trash because of somebody watching a trailer and deciding that it's a white savior movie. Okay. So then, after that happens, Harriet makes the former slave owner, because she's armed, of course, she tells him to drop his weapon. And the people I was with, my study group, the people I was with, they were saying they wanted her to shoot him. And as the movie ended, I wish she had shot him, I wish she shot him. And I told them, I said, this is not a TV show. You know, this is not a Marvel Avengers movie. I mean, if you want that, go see that. This is the life of Harriet Tubman on film. And if all you got out of it is that she should have shot him. And I was talking about, I've been thinking about the scene all week long, because I will be doing a rebuttal. I'm planning it at our next study group meeting. And what I thought about is how she said, during that scene, she said, you're going to die here. Does anybody remember that?
Yes.
You're going to die here. And she was talking about, this is going to be a battlefield. In the Civil War, you and others like you are going to die fighting for a lost cause. And she just completely laid it out. It was an amazing scene because it played on her ability to foresee, you know, what might happen in the future. But she said, you're going to die here, and it's like, I don't have time to be bothered with you. And so she gets on his horse. She gets on his horse, and then she flings his weapon, his gun, back at him. People didn't like that, who I was with. You know, why did you do that? Why did you do that? I was thinking, because you know what? Because she was running it. That was a scene of such power. She was so sure that of where she was, what she was doing, who had the power in that situation. She didn't care if he had a gun. She did not care. You know, she threw that gun back at him, got on his horse, and rode away. And she was clear that nothing was going to happen to her at his hands. I mean, it was really powerful. I really liked it because it showed, you know, that great inner, you know, certainty that you have. And it's a moment, like all of us who've been involved in political struggle, we have all been in situations of risk. And there's a point where you say, you know what, I'm doing it. I'm just going to do it. And I liked it.
Coming, if whoever is that person, can you come up so we can have you first, right? But we wanted to turn to 2020. Keep in mind, we want you also live tweet. We want to get the word out.
My Twitter handle, if you'd like it?
Yes, yes.
My Twitter handle is @the_Barbara_Smith. @the_Barbara_Smith.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at the Barbara Smith, also hashtag Black Women Lead, Black Women in Political Leadership, African at 50. African at 50.
Okay, you got that?
So, Black Women, hashtag Black Women Lead, hashtag Black Women in Political Leadership. What's the other one? Africana 50. And also Black Women 2020, hashtag. Because we want to say that we have vision. Actually got this still from Marsha Crosby that night we were hanging out, after we saw the film at Chili's. And she said, oh, 2020 is coming. So we can use 2020 in different ways to talk about Black women's vision. And actually, I was talking to Marsha about doing a series of projects between the two of us, Ithaca College and Cornell, on Black women, like this kind of discussion we're having here, panels, and so look for that. We're going to work on that for the next semester, next year. But Black Women 2020, Black women's vision, I think we want to claim, right? The way that we're able to be the persons who vote wisely, as happened in the last election, right? But also the people who find ways to sometimes have the vision to see ahead of things or make a way in spite of difficulties as we're doing here. And in my case, working in Africana, I thought I was hired to be a person to work on Black feminist issues, and that's what I think I'm doing. But the opposition comes in spite of it from places you would not believe, including the university's administration. But I won't go there right now, I can do that later. But essentially, we sometimes feel very marginalized. When we're on campus, I don't feel this anywhere else when I leave this university, but I do feel it here. But on next year's election, the treatment of Black women as political leaders, I think in the US, so far has been predictably negative from the way that AOC and a lot of the Black women in Congress, Indiana Romanos, have been treated. Can you comment on what happens when Black women attain a certain level of leadership? Because I know you have also been there yourself. And what about the fact that a white gay male sexuality out of Buttigieg does not necessarily translate into progressive politics
in terms of handling of that. So basically the square sexuality, even coming from a white male or a black male or even a lesbian, as the mayor of Chicago, I think of this was translated to progressive politics. What kinds of comments would you make about any of those?
One of the things about the squad is that they're not just women of color, they're radical women. So it's not just that there are lots of women of color in Congress, relatively speaking. Are there, I should say they're additional, maybe I shouldn't say lots, but there are additional women of color in Congress. But the reason that the squad has distinguished itself is because they definitely take a left of center perspective and they're quite outspoken. And you know, you have somebody who's Palestinian American, you have somebody who is a refugee to this country and an immigrant from Somalia. You have Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who is obviously a firebrand, and you have Ayanna Pressley, who's African American, and they, you know, they stand with each other. So as I said, they're not just, it's not just women of color, it's radical women of color. Now, how radical can you be in a government context? You'll see, you know, we continue to see that. There have always been people on the left who've been in elected office, never a majority. When that has been the case, they've made, I think, a significant difference. As far as Pete Buttigieg, he scares me. Yeah. He is really scary. He is so just slithery, slick, you know. And the fact that he's gay, that just, you applaud it when, that, you know, like when he was kind of called out. Because I think you are skeptical and wondering about it as well. And then this whole trope of like, he's having problems with the black community because he's gay. No, he's having problems with the black community because he's having problems with the black community, including in his own city. I don't think he has the praxis. You know, he may have words about inclusion and etc., but I don't think he really has a record of practice, because that, if he did, the people in his own, you know, hometowns, Fort Wayne, was it Fort Wayne?
South Bend.
South Bend, I'm sorry. The people in South Bend, they would have a different, I think, perspective about him. And was there another part?
That was the question. Another question.
Hi, my name is Meredith. I'm a senior government and deputy justice major, also in Professor Boyd-Sadie's class. So through reading the collective statement and through a lot of other different conversations we've had this semester, I think the trend we've noticed is that too many of the issues talked about decades ago are still on the table today. What kind of advice would you give to young activists dealing with these issues now?
Thank you. And it's true, the issues are still the issues. We are dealing with systemic oppression and systems of oppression that go down hard. And we have different phases of the struggle. But even though my generation was arrogant enough to believe that we were going to fix everything before we were 30, because of course the mantra was don't trust anyone over 30, and you're far past 30 now. But the thing is that we learned, of course, that it takes, you know, we're in a long struggle. And I don't know if I have advice for activists, young organizers, except to keep at it and to make sure that you're doing work that you find joy in. Because the systems of repression and of degradation, inhumanity, and violence, they're too negative and too overwhelming, that if you don't have that spirit of joy coming from somewhere, hopefully connected to your work and your struggle, you're not going to be able to sustain
saying that. And I always say that, I've been saying that for years. If it's making you nervous, if it's making you sleepless, anxious, I say nervous, probably anxious is the right word. If it's making you feel anxiety, exhausted, burned out, then you really need to evaluate and figure out, how can I make this work? I look to people who are my elders, like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Septima Clark. I look at Howard Zinn. I look at these people, and I look at Barbara Deming. I look at Ann Brady. If you don't know who these people are, find out. But I look to these people, they were in it for the long haul, and they had challenging lives, but they also had fulfilling lives. And that's how we have to struggle. There's a wonderful article by Bernice Johnson Reagan in my book, Homegirls. It's the last article in the book. I tell everybody who's interested in organizing into solutions and about trying to find solutions to organizing and how do you do it and maintain it. Read this article. It's called Coalition Politics, Turning the Century. And the century she's talking about turning is from the 20th to the 21st. And she has some really good advice about how you can stay in the struggle for the long term. I'm very interested in, a lot of things, but I've been going to some Extinction Rebellion meetings recently in Albany. And it's, to me, kind of exciting because it's using nonviolent direct action to address global annihilation. And there's another book that I highly recommend, which is Howard Zinn's Snick, the New Abolitionist. If you feel discouraged as an activist now, read Snick, the New Abolitionist by Howard Zinn. You will get many things out of it, but one of the things you'll get out of it is like, damn, that's what they were dealing with? Oh my goodness. It's not just the water fountains and the back of the bus stuff that Hollywood movies gives to you. This is dead up, serious, grassroots, community-based organizing. And these were people, I've read the book 3 times now. Once, the first time was when I was in college, and Howard Zinn came and spoke. And he wasn't the Howard Zinn at that point. He was Howard Zinn who'd written this book about SNCC. And so I went and I got the book, and I read it then. When I reread it last year, I did not remember a single thing about this book. And that is not like me. And I know I read it. I know I read it. And I think maybe the reason I don't remember it is because it's so traumatic. And so I read it last year, and then I reread it because we are reading it in my study group. I'm also co-teaching a course on Black women activists at Mount Holyoke this fall, so we read it for that too. And it's just, the book is incredibly useful. It's very, very useful. You can read Ella Baker, the Barbara Ransby Ella Baker biography too, if you really want to understand what's going on.
Okay, one other question. Sometimes when members of a subordinated group rise to power within an oppressive system, we never show who they're representing, while other groups, as we see now, represent their so-called base unabashedly. And we have many examples, right? People felt, for example, that Obama did not do all he could do, but often we have people getting to political power, leadership positions from a particular group who end up not really representing political positions that the group needs to advance. What kinds of comments would you make about that, or critique of that kind of practice, or anything like?
Well, there's this concept of representational politics, and that's when you depend upon other people to represent your interests, generally by electing them. And that's the limitations of that particular strategy. That you hope, luck of the draw, you hope that you elect the right person. But it's representational politics. It's not you necessarily, or people like you speaking truth to power and asserting your own issues, your own concerns, and changing power relationships. Politics is not about getting elected. Politics is about how power is deployed. All of us are affected by politics. All of us live within politics because every single day we are affected by systems of power, power relationships, power structures, and what's political is how we deal with that reality. So it's not, so many people say, oh, I don't like politics, it's dirty, I don't want to be involved. They're thinking of electoral politics. You can't get away from politics because, even if you live in a, like the Amazon's burning here. The Amazon is burning. So whether you ever voted, whether you ever met anybody who's elected or anything, you're affected. The people who live there, their homes are being destroyed. We have how many millions of climate refugees, and we'll have more and more. That's politics. It's people making decisions, bad decisions, immoral decisions that keep us, and keep other people in danger. So, Kiana Yamada Taylor, I really like how she writes about this in her book, From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, because she talks about the limitations of representational politics and how after the period of black liberation, black power, and black nationalism, after that period, people put their faith in elected representatives, and it didn't necessarily pan out. I think it's hard to be accountable in systems that were not designed for accountability. And that's why I'm really interested in the squad. I'm interested in what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm interested in places and people in places that are taking hold of the possibilities of these systems and seeing what they can do to make things more different.
So I want to make sure, since Barbara mentioned our work, that Kianga Yamada Taylor, how we get free, Black feminism and River Collective, we always check us. River Collective, recommending it as well because it's a conversation with a lot of women at that time, free. So I'm going to try to combine a number of things so that we'll give a chance for the audience to be involved as well. But I wanted you to engage, because at the NWSA last year, I think,
2017.
Yeah, when I saw you in Baltimore, I was so pleased to see you again on summer.
I know.
Yeah, no, I brought Barbara to Binghamton when I was there. That's one of the last times.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Because I moved to Florida. But anyway, there was a question about Jay-Z and Beyonce and people who make it up to a certain level, even though they may have started in a place that was not that financially empowered, but now are. And you made a point, really interesting point about class and access to financial power, how that often changes in terms of people representing their own interests. That's what you talked about. So I wondered if you would talk a little bit about how do class status and political affiliation affect the nature of one's engagement with the world and one's participation and choices and decisions one makes about all sorts of things. And I know you are passionately socialist, and the media seems woefully uninformed about what socialism is. I'm shocked every time, like these reporters seem to not do any research at all before they start calling everybody left and socialist. Everybody is socialist. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that if you don't mind.
Well, I'm hardly an expert about socialism. I would certainly describe myself as a democratic socialist and also a socialist feminist who's anti-racist. So that's different than some of the socialist nations that we have seen. We haven't necessarily seen the kind of nation state, if indeed we need nation states, and that's up for question too. We haven't seen the vision that we would like to have on a governmental level, if you see what I'm saying. But socialism, I'm sure you know, is when the state has determination and has the power to make this decision-making power about how resources are deployed, and makes decisions thinking about the welfare of the entire community, as opposed to just those who own the means of production and who are about making profits. You know, that market-driven, like, the market will fix it. I don't think so. I don't think the market hasn't fixed it yet. So socialism is much more complex than I may be making it, but at bottom it is having a rational system of decision-making around the community needs and the human needs of all people, not just some people. You know, we have the concept of the 99% versus 1%. We have incredible wealth disparity and income inequality in this nation that is only getting worse. We have situations of people, for the first time, being worse off than their family members. You know, being saddled, and I know this will resonate with you, being saddled with a level of loans after you do what you were supposed to do, which is to pursue a higher education, and yet you face a lifetime, you know, or always feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it actually is a lifetime of indebtedness. Why? That doesn't make any sense. Why? I come from a generation when that was not the case. And we were poor students, that is, students who did not have money. And yet, we were able to get, some of us, not all of us by any means, I'm not saying it was completely a level playing field and fair, I'm just saying that the structures then around student aid were very different. You did not leave college with a lifetime of debt because of policies and the way things were structured and organized. Now you do. But anyway, as I said, that's just one aspect of how decisions might be made. But democratic socialism, feminist socialism, anti-racist socialism, anti-imperialist socialism. So, yeah, we don't have that. Some would like to see it.
Black left feminism.
Black left feminism, yes.
So this will be the last question. Actually, this is one you wanted to talk about a little bit, about grassroots organizing. And I think it's important to close there. There was a question about that already. But what are some strategies, issues, projects you see from your experience that we should be thinking about in the next coming years? You have always been definite about grassroots organizing. Actually, this is one of the key areas that you were able to help mobilize across the area. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, grassroots organizing. And then we'll take some questions from you.
I'm very interested, not to say freaked out, I'm very concerned about the impending disaster of uncontrolled climate change, global warming. And I just think that I understand in a somewhat different way than I would have said, you know, like 6 months ago, how important it is for us to be fighting this battle simultaneously with the battles that we continue to fight. Have you noticed how no longer do they report the murders of black people at the hands of the police? Do you think it's because those murders are not happening? It's because, you know, we live in a very short attention span culture where we moved on. The news cycle has moved on. I think that we have many issues to be organizing around, and people are organizing around the criminal and justice system and prison abolition. So it's not that organizing isn't happening, it's just not in front of you in the news as it might have been, say, a couple of years ago. We have, like all the issues that people are working on, to me, are significant issues. The Me Too movement, violence against women, income inequality, labor rights, all of it, and Islamophobia, anti-Muslim, and other kinds of anti-immigrant and xenophobic responses. The children at the border, that's not being reported on either. Those children are still locked up. They still haven't seen their parents. It's a couple of years now. Some of them never will. And neither are the parents able to see their children. We have a government that orphans children consciously and happily. And so none of these issues are unimportant. I'm sure I'm forgetting.
I mean, Harriet, the whole question of enslavement actually is a precursor.
Of the separation. Oh yeah. I mean, this, people say we don't do that, that's not who we are. Yeah, it's definitely we are. It's definitely who we are. Because the separation of not only black children in the family, from families in the context of enslavement, but also the boarding schools. Taking indigenous children out of their communities and trying everything to make them into white people, or at least into the shame indigenous people. I mean, just appalling and inexcusable. But as I said, all of these issues, I don't have any magic answers around how to do organizing. I guess my major piece of advice these days, as you hear from all of the books that I recommended, people need to read. People need to find out about their history. They need to find out about their forebears. They need to find out about the people who are doing the same kind of work decades or perhaps even centuries before, so they can see that they're part of a tradition, and also to see what the solutions were when things might even have been worse. So that's what I would highly recommend. And I know, given that we're at Cornell University, I probably don't have to really encourage people to read, but or do I? But the thing is, people don't often think of reading in relationship to their activism and their organizing. It's so important to be grounded in our organizing traditions, and in that way, they have a better idea of what we might create in the future.
So we have about 15 minutes for some questions from the audience. We'll take a few of them. Questions from people?
There's one.
There's one person.
So in some of your works, you talk about identity politics, and a number of just individuals who kind of argue, especially in the right, downside of that. So what are some of your thoughts on the idea of employing your identity into your actual politics and actually being proud of that as opposed to trying to not use that in politics?
I'm really glad you asked that question. We believe, we not found anything to contradict that the term identity politics first appears anywhere where it appears in the Common River Collective Statement. I'm not saying that those who use the term and use it inaccurately often and certainly attack it, I'm not saying that they read the statement. No, not at all. I think that there's a way that it got perhaps into the zeitgeist without them necessarily knowing what the source is. And many people do not know what the source is. But what we meant was simply this, which is that black women have a right to determine our own political agendas based upon our lived experiences and our relationship to multiple systems of power and oppression, period. That's what we meant. And the reason we said it is because that was not a very supported view at the time. We asserted it because the perspective was you're supposed to be about other people's issues. If they happen to touch on your life and your issues, that's fine. But you're not supposed to bring up anything that's not in the template. That's why this book, the green book as people call it, the other green book, all the women are white, all the blacks are men, but some of us are gray. And the subtitle is Black Women Studies. But that was the attitude, the perspective back then. So we coined the term identity politics to say that we had a right to build our own political movement and our own political agenda. And we were not separatists, and we didn't think that the only people that we could work with, I've already said that this afternoon, we didn't think that the only people that we could work with were people who were identical to us. We worked across differences, but we also thought we had a right.
I need to say that we had initially invited Barbara just for the class, and she was happy to do that. But once people knew she was going to be here, American Studies, they were like, no, we have to bring it. FGSS kind of almost took it over. We were like happy for that support from Aiden and so many other people. Cornell's Humanities Center, 80 White House, and so on. So we've had a lot of support from colleagues around the campus, and it's evident in your presence here as well. Russell. I know you got a
Thanks so much. Thank you, Professor Smith, for coming and blessing us. It's really an honor. So I wanted to ask about the anti-imperialism piece. It seems to me, if you look back...
It's kind of muffled,
Yeah.
so maybe stand up.
Hold it,
sorry.
I think
hold
it
it
may
away
be
from your mouth.
interference.
Yeah, you had it too close to your mouth.
Oh, okay. If you look back over American history, it seems to me that black folk have been among the groups that have been most consistently outspoken about the question of empire and in terms of opposing empire and imperialism. And I guess in the today, in the wake of the coup in Bolivia, in the context of so much oppression overseas, so much of which the United States is playing a central role in, Gaza, etc. I just wonder if you would reflect on the role of African Americans in terms of continuing this tradition of anti-imperialism and being on the vanguard in terms of opposition to empire, particularly in the wake of President Obama, because it seems to me that the empire has now incorporated a handful of black folks in terms of the management, the management of empire. And I wonder if black folks we've gotten a bit lost. We've lost our way in terms of leadership and taking an anti-imperialist stance.
Right. Thank you, that's a really good question. I think I mentioned Keonda Taylor's book, From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation. She does a really good job of talking about that, and so does Barbara Ransby and her book, Making All Black Lives Matter. And not all Black Americans are, people of African heritage living in the United States. Not all of us have that anti-imperialist perspective. It's really those of us who are on the left more than just the entire whole. But if we do have that kind of perspective, it is very sharp. It's a very sharp and incisive perspective. I think we need to keep alert. I think that it's so important for us as people living in the United States who are part of the African diaspora to have an internationalist perspective. It's really, really important. And I'm a bit disturbed by this concept now, I don't know how you say it, but American descendants of slaves. I'm a little concerned about that, more than a little concerned, because it seems to me it's not taking into account, well, if somebody's from either an African nation or a Caribbean nation, those places were colonized. So the same people who colonized here, and also if you're talking about the Caribbean, the people were enslaved there. And then if you're talking about African nations, some of the nations were implicated in the slave trade. You can't like get away from it that easily. And I just think that that kind of solidarity, that international solidarity, is what we need to be about. But as I said, not all people feel that way. It was Veterans Day on Monday, and some people were talking about how, say proudly, like so-and-so, talking about past generations, they were in the armed services, and they fought here, they fought there. And there is something to be said for having that level of, I don't know what to call it, because we know what wars are. But the thing is that it's a way of saying we're part of this. You don't think we're part of this, and we are part of this. Like if you're patriotic, we have some people who are patriotic too. So there's that, but then there's also and then there's the people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and others, many others, who said, no, not really about the warfare. Not really about, this nation and supporting this nation running roughshod all over the entire globe. I mean, the situation in Syria now with this fool, and he's not just a fool, because a fool could be, he's a dangerous fool. I mean, because a fool could be benign, but he is a dangerous fool. And there are so many dead people now in that region, and there will be so many more, because he thinks this is a video game or either a business deal, and it's just indefensible. It's really indefensible. So that was a great question.
Any more questions, Andrew? Thank you, Bryce. So we'll take probably 2 more days of reception outside.
Thank you. Listening to you is so empowering. You may have already addressed part of my question, but I will ask it. Because, and going back to Russell's question just now, empire. An empire that includes different groups. I'm from Africa. I have been in these places for nearly 40 years, almost 30 years here at Cornell. There's a sense that empire, even if it has relinquished part of its grips through decolonization, formal decolonization, empires knows best. They are the ones who must define what is and what ought to be. And the empire and its gender configuration, there have not been a lot in history, the women chastising the men for wrecking the world. Many of them were unhappy because they didn't have the same opportunity to go around. And so some of them see still the global south, those places, as places of, lesser human, the voiceless African woman. And therefore, until now, when the women of the global south, in certain contexts, there is the sentiment that they still believe that they are the ones who must define. That you have been oppressed for so long, you don't even know. You write, you don't know how to articulate. When you say that we have different, you're talking about identity politics. So we have commonalities, but we have different historical trajectories. So you can't tell my own history better than I can.
That's correct.
And that is reflected still in academia. The expectation to see the voiceless African woman who would be sitting quietly and the others would speak for her. And when they realize you have a voice, it's a surprise. And when that voice is not repeating what those who know best have said, it becomes a problem. So I'm wondering, in your own trajectory, how did you find that? How did you address it, both individually and at the level of the organization?
Thank you so much for that really thoughtful lesson about how people in the belly of the beast here, how we can be very ignorant and very arrogant when we think we're addressing and connecting with people who are a part of our family. So I don't really have any specifics. I just know that in my life, I've been fortunate to interact with people from different backgrounds, including people who are in other parts of our diaspora. And it's really important to listen and to learn. U.S. mainstream feminism has often been very dictatorial and very demeaning of people who they think they know better than. Because those kinds of relationships, power relationships, die hard. But comedy was always a very small group, but it was also a group that was more diverse than perhaps the information that's out there reflects. We would meet with people from other nations, kitchen table even more so, kitchen table women of color press. We were in contact, as I said, wherever English was read and spoken, we had contacts across borders with our sisters in other places. So I don't have any, again, I have no particular analytical content to add to what you just said, but you made a point, which is important for people who have limitations of understanding and limitations of vision around who everybody else is, to sometimes be quiet, and to listen to those who can help us, to be more conscious and to know more. I love to learn. That's like kind of who I am. So the more I can find out, the better. I don't want to know about everything, but the thing is that I do want to know, like, I'm interested in history, literature, and social change, and art. So yeah, I don't want to know about
and film.
Yeah, the film, yeah, art, yeah. But the things, physics, no, not going to be going there. But the thing is that I love learning, and I love being here today because I've had that opportunity to learn.
Is there one more question? Over there, yes. Can you come up? Oh, thank you, Chris. And then we will invite you to the reception.
Thank you for being here today, first of all. So you mentioned the importance of joy and the work that you do in being an activist. So I'm wondering, along with that work, what do you do to keep yourself mentally and spiritually intact?
Great question. Actually, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask. So I said thank you.
So of course you're making an assumption. Yeah, okay. Well, I'll pretend as if it is. As you can perhaps tell, I do have a sense of humor. I think it's really important to do that, to have that. Because if you don't, you just are not going to make it. You just can't make it, you know. There's always another way of looking at things. And I think that, my humor comes out of my Black identity and my Black U.S. identity. And it's
there's a lot of irony, you know. And I like that. As I said, I do love art of all the various kinds, and try to partake of it as much as I possibly can. I have wonderful friends who basically are family, and that makes a big difference too. I have been privileged to have, although I don't have personal individual children, I've had a lot of children in my life, and they're always both interesting and challenging. You know how y'all are. But delightful, so delightful. I'll be seeing one of them tomorrow, actually. 18 months old. But in any event, you know, like you have to find where your joy is. I am retired. I retired at the end of 2017, and you actually got a little card about why I was able to retire. The Smith Caring Circle, it's like a people's pension that a friend of mine had the wonderful foresight to initiate. So that's really what was the deciding factor, determining factor in me being able to retire. I'm far too busy for somebody to retire. Far too busy, particularly in the fall of 2019. But the thing is that I do try to take time for myself and take care of myself. And no is one of the most beautiful words in the English language. We need to learn how to say it when it's on our own behalf. And just, you know, every day there's something that potentially is beautiful and that really fills our spirit, even when things get really challenging. So, you know, I guess it's like an attitude. I've always been a political optimist. And where people are struggling, I see hope. And that helps me a lot. You know, that's just me. Thank you.
Yes, I was checking her out. We had her first. And like you keep saying, it's only 30 miles from here. Don't leave going out without having the car there, see the space and feel the energy. It's very powerful energy there. Anyway, you actually know it. So we have a reception outside, and we're so thankful for your presence here.